The summer of 1987 had been an unusually warm one for the small Midwestern town of Maple Hollow. The evenings usually carried a gentle breeze that smelled faintly of cut grass and honeysuckle, but on this particular Friday night, the air sat heavy and still, so still that the elm trees along the street seemed carved from stone. Their broad canopies cast long, knotted shadows across the cracked sidewalks. Not a single branch stirred. Elm Street was the kind of place that usually felt safe. Old couples watered their lawns every evening. Children rode their bikes until the streetlights blinked on. Porch swings creaked lazily while radios played soft rock through open windows. But tonight the usual sounds, the clatter of dishes, the low hum of televisions, had faded into an almost reverent silence. It was as though the entire neighborhood was holding its breath. At number 14, a two-story house with peeling white paint and a crooked weather vane, 16-year-old Claire Matthews pressed her forehead to the window pane. The glass was cool against her skin despite the sticky air inside. She had the unsettling sensation that something out there was watching her. From her second-floor bedroom, she could see all the way down the block, where the lamppost glowed a weak amber. Yet the dark seemed to swell and thicken in the spaces between those pools of light. Claire squinted. For a second she thought she saw a movement, a ripple of deeper black beneath the towering elms. But when she blinked, the shape was gone. Downstairs, the clink of her mother's teacup broke the silence. "Claire?" Her mother called, her voice too bright. "You'll be late for the movie." "I'm not going," Claire replied automatically. She had planned to meet her best friend Nora at the late showing of The Lost Boys, but now the thought of leaving the house filled her with unease. She couldn't explain why. Something about the night felt wrong. Her mother appeared at the foot of the stairs, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "You okay? You've been jumpy all day." "I'm fine," Claire lied. Her mother gave her a long look, but didn't press further. Across the street, old Mr. Hutchins' porch light flickered and went out. Claire frowned. The light had burned steadily every night for as long as she could remember. Seconds later, a second porch light 2 doors down winked off. Then another. Within moments the entire block had gone dark, leaving only the faint, ghostly glow of the half-hidden moon. The sudden blackout drew neighbors onto their porches. She could hear confused murmurs. "Must be a blown transformer. Check the breaker box." But their voices carried strangely in the thick air, as if muffled by invisible walls. Claire's father, a tall man with broad shoulders and a reputation for fixing anything, stepped outside with flashlight. "Stay here," he said over his shoulder. The beam of his torch cut a narrow tunnel through the dark. Claire leaned out her window, watching as he crossed the lawn. Then she heard it, a low, distant sound like the sigh of wind through a canyon, except there was no wind. The elm branches remained rigid, their leaves unnaturally still. The noise deepened, a slow rumble that made the hairs on her arms rise. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. The ground beneath her feet, the air above, the dark spaces between the houses. A dog barked sharply down the street, then yelped and fell silent. Her father stopped mid-stride. "Did you hear that?" he called back toward the house. Before anyone could answer, the flashlight flickered and died. The street sank into perfect darkness. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then, as Claire watched in disbelief, the shadows beneath the elms began to swell. Slowly at first, like ink spreading through water. They stretched across the cracked pavement, climbing fences and porch steps, until they reached the very edges of the houses. It was not a trick of the moonlight. The darkness itself was moving. Neighbors gasped and stumbled backward. Someone screamed. The sound was quickly swallowed by the growing hush. Claire's mother clutched the banister. "Tom!" she shouted to her husband. He turned, but the darkness surged forward like a living tide and swallowed him whole. "Dad!" Claire cried, racing down the stairs 2 at a time. She flung open the front door. The night hit her like a wall, humid, silent, and wrong. She could no longer see the street, only a vast shifting blackness where her father had stood. Then, from somewhere inside that living dark, came a whisper, not a human voice exactly, more like the memory of a voice, soft and sibilant. "Claire!" Her breath caught. She felt the sound against her skin, a vibration rather than a noise. Her mother grabbed her arm and yanked her back inside. She slammed the door and shoved the deadbolt home. "We're staying put," she said, voice trembling. "But Dad—" "He'll be fine," her mother insisted, though her knuckles were white. The telephone rang. Both women jumped. Claire's mother stared at the handset on the hallway table. It rang again, an old-fashioned rotary phone with a shrill metallic clang that sounded far too loud in the stifling quiet. Claire's mother lifted the receiver. "Hello?" Static hissed. Then a voice, deep, hollow, and oddly distorted, intoned a single phrase. "The night no one sleeps has begun." The line went dead. Across town, at the old Maple Hollow Library, the night janitor was making his final round. He had heard none of the commotion on Elm Street. The thick stone walls muffled outside noise. As he swept between the stacks, the overhead lights flickered. He frowned and glanced upward. A single bulb exploded with a pop, showering him with tiny shards of glass. He cursed and shielded his eyes. When he lowered his arm, every light in the library had gone out. From the darkness between the shelves came the faint sound of pages turning, one after another, faster and faster. Claire backed away from the phone, her heart hammering. "Mom, what's happening?" Her mother didn't answer. She was staring at the front window. Claire turned. Outside, the shadows had crept up the glass, blotting out the last traces of moonlight. The pane rattled as if something enormous pressed against it from the other side. Then, faint and far away, came the toll of the old town clock. 12 slow, deliberate chimes. Midnight. With each chime the glass fogged, as though touched by an unseen breath. The 12th chime faded into an echo that seemed to linger in the air long after the old clock had fallen silent. Claire felt her mother's nails dig into her arm. "Basement," her mother whispered. "Now." Claire hesitated. "What about Dad?" Her mother's jaw tightened. "He'll find us. Move." They hurried toward the kitchen door that led down to the cellar. The house creaked as though something heavy had settled onto the roof. Dust sifted down from the ceiling in lazy spirals. Claire reached the top of the basement steps and flicked the light switch. Nothing. A thick, velvety darkness gaped below. Her mother grabbed the emergency flashlight from the counter and snapped it on. The narrow beam barely seemed to cut through the gloom. They descended, each footfall an explosion in the otherwise stifling silence. Halfway down, Claire heard the whisper again, faint but distinct. Her name stretched like taffy. "Cille Iyer." She froze. Her mother turned, the flashlight trembling. "What is it?" "Did you—" Claire began, but before she could finish, the bulb in the flashlight dimmed to a sickly yellow glow. "Battery's fine," her mother muttered, slapping the casing. The light flickered back to white, but a cold wind swept up from the basement, carried with it the smell of damp earth and something older, something metallic, like rusted iron or old blood. They reached the bottom and huddled near the shelves of canned fruit. The cellar door at the top of the stairs slammed shut with force that rattled the jars. Claire flinched. "Stay behind me," her mother said. She set the flashlight on a crate. So the beam faced the stairwell. Its light quivered across the steps. The silence returned, dense and oppressive. Then came a scratching. At first it sounded like mice in the walls, a faint skittering. But the noise grew louder, closer, until it became a deliberate scrape, like nails dragging slowly across wood. Claire's mother grabbed a broom handle and pointed it toward the steps. "Who's there?" The scratching stopped. A pause. Then 3 heavy knocks on the cellar door. Claire's heart pounded. "Dad?" she called, her voice a thin squeak. No answer. Another knock, louder this time. Her mother tightened her grip on the broom. "Tom, is that you?" Silence. The flashlight flickered again, its beam sputtering like a candle in a gale. The knocking resumed, this time rapid, frantic, as though many fists beat against the door at once. Her mother lunged for a flashlight just as it went out. They were swallowed by blackness. Across Elm Street, Nora Carson, the friend Claire had planned to meet for the movie, stood on her own front porch clutching a cordless phone. The line was dead. She had tried calling Claire 3 times, but all she heard was static. The neighborhood lay beneath an unnatural darkness. Even the stars seemed to have vanished. The air smelled of ozone and rain, though the sky held no clouds. Her dog, Baxter, whined and pressed against her leg. "Sho," she whispered, stroking his head. From the direction of the town square came the toll of the clock. 12 chimes that seemed to stretch for eternity. Then, from somewhere unseen, came a chorus of low voices murmuring in unison. Nora backed into the house and locked the door. The voices grew louder, though no one stood outside. In the Matthews cellar, the darkness pressed so tightly around Claire that she could almost feel it brush against her skin. The knocks ceased as abruptly as they had begun, replaced by a new sound, the creak of a single footstep descending the stairs. One step, pause, another step. Claire's mother fumbled for the flashlight, smacking it against her palm. Nothing. The unseen presence descended steadily, step after step, until it reached the bottom. Claire strained to see. Her eyes adjusted enough to make out a shape darker than the darkness itself, tall and thin, with shoulders that sloped like broken branches. Then 2 points of dull red light blinked open where eyes should be. The figure spoke, its voice a dry rustle, like leaves blown across pavement. "Sleep will not save you." Claire's breath caught in her throat. Her mother swung the broom wildly. It passed through the shape as though through smoke. The red eyes flared. A cold gust swept through the cellar, extinguishing even the faint glow from the cracks around the door. Claire felt something icy brush her cheek, and a whisper breathed into her ear. "Midnight is only the beginning." Suddenly the flashlight flared to life, blinding in its brightness. The figure was gone. Only the old wooden stairs remained, empty and silent. Claire's mother slammed the flashlight onto the shelf and gripped her daughter's shoulders. "Listen to me," she said, voice trembling. "No matter what happens tonight, you stay with me. Understand?" Claire nodded, though her knees shook. Above them, the house groaned. The sound of footsteps, many footsteps, echoed through the rooms overhead. At the edge of town, the library janitor stumbled toward the main entrance, his heart hammering. The whispers between the stacks had become a storm of rustling pages. Books leapt from shelves, flinging themselves open midair. Letters peeled from the printed pages like smoke and swirled toward the ceiling, forming shapes that writhed like living things. One by one, the letters rearranged themselves into a single sentence that glowed in a pale green light. "No one will sleep." Then the letters dissolved into dust. The janitor bolted for the door, only to find it sealed as if welded shut. Behind him, the sound of turning pages swelled to a deafening roar. Back on Elm Street, the darkness continued to spread. Street after street fell silent as porch lights winked out. Inside their cellar, Claire and her mother heard a sudden, sharp crack from the foundation wall. A thin line split the concrete, and from it seeped a mist so cold that frost formed instantly on the jar's preserved peaches. The mist coiled toward them, carrying with it that same metallic scent. Claire's mother pulled her close. "Don't breathe it," she whispered. The mist swirled around their ankles, climbing higher. Claire felt the chill bite through her jeans. Then from the crack in the wall, a voice issued forth, low, unearthly and unmistakably human. It spoke a name neither of them recognized. Holloway. The name hung in the damp air like a curse. Claire's mother stiffened. "My grandmother's maiden name," she whispered, almost to herself. The mist pulsed as though pleased. Somewhere above, the front door banged open. "Tom," her mother shouted, hope flaring. No answer. Only the slow, deliberate sound of the door closing again, followed by the unmistakable click of the lock sliding into place. The footsteps resumed, measured, patient, moving across the floorboards directly above their heads. Each step made the ceiling dust quiver. Claire clutched her mother's hand. "That's not Dad," she whispered. Her mother didn't reply. Her eyes were fixed on the ceiling, wide and unblinking, as the unseen intruder began to descend the main staircase. The summer of 1987 had been an unusually warm one for the small Midwestern town of Maple Hollow. The evenings usually carried a gentle breeze that smelled faintly of cut grass and honeysuckle, but on this particular Friday night, the air sat heavy and still, so still that the elm trees along the street seemed carved from stone. Their broad canopies cast long, knotted shadows across the cracked sidewalks. Not a single branch stirred. Elm Street was the kind of place that usually felt safe. Old couples watered their lawns every evening. Children rode their bikes until the streetlights blinked on. Porch swings creaked lazily while radios played soft rock through open windows. But tonight the usual sounds, the clatter of dishes, the low hum of televisions, had faded into an almost reverent silence. It was as though the entire neighborhood was holding its breath. At number 14, a two-story house with peeling white paint and a crooked weather vane, 16-year-old Claire Matthews pressed her forehead to the window pane. The glass was cool against her skin despite the sticky air inside. She had the unsettling sensation that something out there was watching her. From her second-floor bedroom, she could see all the way down the block, where the lamppost glowed a weak amber. Yet the dark seemed to swell and thicken in the spaces between those pools of light. Claire squinted. For a second she thought she saw movement, a ripple of deeper black beneath the towering elms. But when she blinked, the shape was gone. Downstairs, the clink of her mother's teacup broke the silence. "Claire?" Her mother called, her voice too bright. "You'll be late for the movie." "I'm not going," Claire replied automatically. She had planned to meet her best friend Nora at the late showing of The Lost Boys, but now the thought of leaving the house filled her with unease. She couldn't explain why. Something about the night felt wrong. Her mother appeared at the foot of the stairs, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "You okay? You've been jumpy all day." "I'm fine," Claire lied. Her mother gave her a long look, but didn't press further. Across the street, old Mr. Hutchins' porch light flickered and went out. Claire frowned. The light had burned steadily every night for as long as she could remember. Seconds later, a second porch light 2 doors down winked off. Then another. Within moments the entire block had gone dark, leaving only the faint, ghostly glow of the half-hidden moon. The sudden blackout drew neighbors onto their porches. She could hear confused murmurs. "Must be a blown transformer. Check the breaker box." But their voices carried strangely in the thick air, as if muffled by invisible walls. Claire's father, a tall man with broad shoulders and a reputation for fixing anything, stepped outside with flashlight. "Stay here," he said over his shoulder. The beam of his torch cut a narrow tunnel through the dark. Claire leaned out her window, watching as he crossed the lawn. Then she heard it, a low, distant sound like the sigh of wind through a canyon, except there was no wind. The elm branches remained rigid, their leaves unnaturally still. The noise deepened, a slow rumble that made the hairs on her arms rise. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. The ground beneath her feet, the air above, the dark spaces between the houses. A dog barked sharply down the street, then yelped and fell silent. Her father stopped mid-stride. "Did you hear that?" he called back toward the house. Before anyone could answer, the flashlight flickered and died. The street sank into perfect darkness. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then, as Claire watched in disbelief, the shadows beneath the elms began to swell. Slowly at first, like ink spreading through water. They stretched across the cracked pavement, climbing fences and porch steps, until they reached the very edges of the houses. It was not a trick of the moonlight. The darkness itself was moving. Neighbors gasped and stumbled backward. Someone screamed. The sound was quickly swallowed by the growing hush. Claire's mother clutched the banister. "Tom!" she shouted to her husband. He turned, but the darkness surged forward like a living tide and swallowed him whole. "Dad!" Claire cried, racing down the stairs 2 at a time. She flung open the front door. The night hit her like a wall, humid, silent, and wrong. She could no longer see the street, only a vast shifting blackness where her father had stood. Then, from somewhere inside that living dark, came a whisper, not a human voice exactly, more like the memory of a voice, soft and sibilant. "Claire!" Her breath caught. She felt the sound against her skin, a vibration rather than a noise. Her mother grabbed her arm and yanked her back inside. She slammed the door and shoved the deadbolt home. "We're staying put," she said, voice trembling. "But Dad—" "He'll be fine," her mother insisted, though her knuckles were white. The telephone rang. Both women jumped. Claire's mother stared at the handset on the hallway table. It rang again, an old-fashioned rotary phone with a shrill metallic clang that sounded far too loud in the stifling quiet. Claire's mother lifted the receiver. "Hello?" Static hissed. Then a voice, deep, hollow, and oddly distorted, intoned a single phrase. "The night no one sleeps has begun." The line went dead. Across town, at the old Maple Hollow Library, the night janitor was making his final round. He had heard none of the commotion on Elm Street. The thick stone walls muffled outside noise. As he swept between the stacks, the overhead lights flickered. He frowned and glanced upward. A single bulb exploded with a pop, showering him with tiny shards of glass. He cursed and shielded his eyes. When he lowered his arm, every light in the library had gone out. From the darkness between the shelves came the faint sound of pages turning, one after another, faster and faster. Claire backed away from the phone, her heart hammering. "Mom, what's happening?" Her mother didn't answer. She was staring at the front window. Claire turned. Outside, the shadows had crept up the glass, blotting out the last traces of moonlight. The pane rattled as if something enormous pressed against it from the other side. Then, faint and far away, came the toll of the old town clock. 12 slow, deliberate chimes. Midnight. With each chime the glass fogged, as though touched by an unseen breath. The intruder's footsteps on the staircase slowed. Each creak would carrying through the silence like the ticking of an unseen clock. Dust sifted from the basement ceiling and settled on Claire's hair. She held her breath. Her mother tightened her grip. "Don't move," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the thudding of Claire's heart. The footsteps paused at the ground floor landing. For a long, unbearable moment nothing happened. Then came the faint scrape of metal, like the edge of a key dragging across the banister. Claire's mother raised a dim flashlight toward the ceiling. The beam quivered, catching motes of dust, but nothing more. Another creak. A slow, deliberate step toward the cellar door. Claire's mouth went dry. "It's not Dad," she breathed. The doorknob rattled once, twice, then it turned. The door didn't open. Instead, 3 deliberate knocks echoed through the basement. Her mother steadied the flashlight. "Who's there?" No answer. The knocking grew faster, in erratic rhythm, like frantic Morse code. The very air seemed to vibrate with each blow. Claire's mother raised her voice. "Tom, if that's you." A whisper slithered through the wood. "Sleep will not save you." Claire's mother stiffened. The door handle twisted violently. Wood groaned. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the knocking stopped. Only the sound of their breathing filled the space. Across town, at Nora Carson's house, the whispers outside had multiplied. They drifted like smoke around the windows and seeped through the walls. Baxter, her terrier, whimpered and hid beneath the sofa. Nora's father lit a hurricane lantern. "Telephone's dead," he said, "and the TV's just snow." Nora clutched her mother's hand. "It's like the whole town." The lantern flickered and died. Darkness swallowed the living room. From somewhere outside came the mournful toll of the town clock. But this time it struck not once, not 12 times, just once and again and again. 3 slow, heavy chimes. With each toll, the house trembled as if the very foundation objected to the sound. On Elm Street, the library janitor pounded on the main doors, his palms slick with sweat. The whispers behind him had risen to a chaotic chorus, like hundreds of voices reciting different passages at once. Books leapt from shelves and flung themselves against the walls. He rammed his shoulder against the door. It held fast. The chorus fell silent. A single book floated gently to the floor at his feet. Its cracked leather cover bore no title. The janitor knelt, trembling, the book open on its own, pages riffling, until they stopped at a single sentence written in a deep crimson ink. "The night no one sleeps has begun." Before he could move, the letters bled across the page and formed his name. He stumbled back, heart hammering, as the ink spread to cover every inch of the page, then rose in the paper in thin, twisting threads like smoke. The threads coiled toward him. In the Matthews basement, Claire's mother pulled her close. "We stay here," she whispered. "No matter what." But Claire shook her head. If that's not Dad up there, we can't just wait. A new sound cut her off. The slow, deliberate creak of the living room floorboards directly above them. Someone or something was walking from window to window, testing each latch. Then the sound of sliding glass. Claire's mother raised a flashlight and swung the beam toward the stairwell. The light flickered and went out. Complete darkness. A single breath, cold, damp, washed over him from the top of the stairs. And then a voice, barely more than a sigh. Claire. Across the street, Mrs. Hutchins, widowed 3 years, stood on her porch clutching a shawl around her shoulders. She had seen the blackout spread like a tide to the neighborhood, and when the town clock began its strange triple toll, she felt her heart seize. Her late husband had once spoken of a night like this, a night in 1927 when, he said, the elms took their payment. She had laughed then. She did not laugh now. The elm tree at the edge of her yard groaned as if under great weight. Its bark split with sharp crack. From the wound seeped a pale green light. Mrs. Hutchins gasped. The light coalesced into the shape of a hand, long, skeletal fingers that reached toward her. She tried to scream, but no sound came. Back in the basement, the footsteps resumed, this time descending the stairs. One step. Pause. Another step. Claire's mother gripped the broom handle like a weapon. "Show yourself," she demanded, though her voice shook. A figure emerged from the darkness. Tall, impossibly thin, draped in shadows that clung like smoke. 2 faint red embers burned where eyes should have been. It spoke in a dry whisper. You cannot hide from the elm. The room grew colder. Frost formed on the metal shelving. Claire's breath came in visible clouds. Her mother swung the broom. It passed through the figure as though through mist. The red eyes brightened. Tonight, the voice said, the street remembers. The cellar's air grew so cold that Claire's breath plumed white. The figure's red eyes burned brighter, twin embers in the dark. Her mother held the broom in front of them like a sword. "Stay back," she barked, though fear sharpened every syllable. The figure tilted its head, a gesture almost curious. The sound of dry leaves rustling filled the basement, though there were no leaves to move. The street remembers, it whispered again, the words sliding like smoke across the concrete walls. And it collects what it is owed. "What do you want?" Claire's mother demanded. The figure's ember eyes narrowed. "Sleep," it said simply. The sleep that was denied. Claire felt the cold seep into her bones. She wanted to run, but her legs refused to move. Her mother swung the broom again, but the figure blurred like mist and reformed 2 steps closer. The frost on the jars of fruit thickened into white rime. Suddenly the figure lifted a hand, long and thin as a branch, and pointed toward Claire. Her heart stuttered. Before her mother could shield her, a sound like a great tree cracking in a storm reverberated through the house. The basement walls shuddered. Dust rained down in a gray curtain. The figure lowered its hand and spoke a single name. "Holloway." Claire flinched. "That name again," she whispered. Her mother's face drained of color. "My grandmother's name," she murmured. The figure's ember eyes flared and the whisper became a hiss. The debt of Holloway must be paid. Then it dissolved. Simply collapsed into a swirl of shadow that slipped through the crack in the foundation and vanished. For a moment, there was only the drip of water from a rusted pipe. Claire's mother sagged against the wall, clutching the broom like a lifeline. We have to find your father," she said finally, voice hoarse. Claire nodded, her own voice lost somewhere in the pounding of her heart. They climbed the basement steps cautiously. The doorknob turned without resistance. The door creaked open. The house above lay in absolute silence. The hallway smelled faintly of ozone, like the air after lightning. "Tom," her mother called. Her voice echoed oddly, as if the walls had grown farther apart. No answer. Outside, Elm Street lay drowned in darkness. The lamps were dead. The moon had vanished behind a sheet of unnatural cloud. Across the street, Nora clutched Baxter beneath the dining room table. Her parents had retreated upstairs to check the fuse box, but Nora could hear no movement from above, only the long, slow creak of the floorboards, as if someone else were pacing there. She whispered to the trembling dog, "It's okay." "It's okay." But her own voice betrayed her. From the living room window came a tap. Once, twice, 3 times. She crawled toward it and peeked through the curtain. Nothing. Then, directly behind her, the grandfather clock chimed. Not the familiar single strike of the hour, but an eerie triple toll, the same unnatural rhythm she'd heard earlier. Baxter whimpered. When she turned back to the window, words had appeared on the glass in a faint green frost. "No one will sleep." At the library, the janitor backed against the sealed main doors. The smoke threads of crimson letters had wound around his arms like vines. They tightened, icy and burning at once. He struggled, but the tendrils only drew him closer to the floating book. "Stay awake," a chorus of voices intoned, though the letters on the page spelled the opposite. "Sleep and pay." The janitor's eyelids grew heavy. "No," he whispered, fighting a sudden, irresistible drowsiness. The last thing he saw before the darkness claimed him was the book snapping shut with a thunderclap that shook the entire library. Claire and her mother crept through the silent house. The living room curtains fluttered though no breeze stirred. Her mother's voice was a thin thread. "Tom." From upstairs came the creak of a bedroom door. Claire's stomach twisted. "Stay here," her mother said, stepping toward the staircase. "No, I'm coming with you." They climbed together, each step complaining under their weight. At the top landing, the hallway stretched unnaturally long, its far end lost in shadow. Her father's voice drifted from the master bedroom. "Helen?" Her mother exhaled in relief. "Tom." They hurried toward the door. But as they entered the room, the voice repeated, this time from behind them, at the opposite end of the hall. "Helen?" They spun. The hallway was empty. The bedroom behind them grew suddenly cold. Claire caught a flicker of movement in the mirror over the dresser. The tall, thin figure with ember eyes, standing directly behind them. She whirled. No one. The mirror, however, still held a reflection, red eyes glowing like coals. "The night no one sleeps has begun," the reflection whispered. The glass cracked from corner to corner. A gust of freezing air swept through the house, rattling every window. The elm trees outside groaned, their branches twisting like tortured limbs. Claire clung to her mother as the whisper filled every room, every wall, every heartbeat. "Sleep will not save you." Far down Elm Street, Mrs. Hutchins' scream finally tore the silence, carrying like a distant warning through the dark. The night of sleepless terror had truly begun. The night had not softened with the approach of dawn. Elm Street remained shrouded in the same bruised darkness, as if the sky itself refused to release the town from its grip. The lamps, the moon, even the distant gleam of the highway, all had been swallowed by an endless black. Claire stood at the upstairs hallway window, the cracked mirror behind her still whispering fragments of her name. Her mother had managed to wedge the bedroom door shut, but the faint sound of branches raking the siding never ceased. It was a sound both gentle and deliberate, like a fingernail across porcelain. "We can't just stay here," Claire said finally, her voice low and ragged. "We have to know what it wants." Her mother tightened the shawl around her shoulders. "It called you Holloway. My grandmother's name." She paused, eyes distant. "There are things I was told as a child, stories about the Holloway women. I never believed them." Claire turned from the window. "Stories." Her mother hesitated. "When I was little, my grandmother used to warn me, never let the elms grow restless. She said our family made a bargain here, long before the town was built." A sudden knock interrupted her. 3 slow, heavy raps from above, not at the door. From the ceiling. Claire froze. The attic. The knocks came again, louder this time. Dust sifted down from the trapdoor at the hall's end. Her mother's face tightened. "No one has been up there for years." Claire took a step toward the attic door before she could think. The wood above creaked, as if someone were pacing directly overhead. Her mother grabbed her arm. "Claire, don't." But Claire had already crossed the hallway. Each board beneath her feet moaned like an old voice protesting her weight. She reached for the cord that released the attic ladder. It slipped from her fingers, swinging lightly, though she had not touched it. The ladder unfolded on its own with a dry, splintering sigh. Cold air spilled from the darkness above. Across the street, Nora Carson crept through her own darkened hallway. Her parents had not returned from the fuse box. Their absence felt like an open wound in the silence. Baxter patted at her heels, ears flat. The frost words on the window, "And no one will sleep," still glowed faintly behind her. She heard it then, a soft, almost musical humming from her parents' room, a tune she recognized from a music box her mother kept locked away. Nora pushed the door open. The room was empty. On the dresser sat the music box, its lid wide, the ballerina turning in slow, jerky circles. But the key had not been wound. The ballerina's painted eyes glistened wetly. As the melody slowed, the tiny figure bent at the waist as if bowing, and whispered, in a voice too small for its size, "Stay awake, Nora." Baxter whimpered and bolted from the room. The music box slammed shut with a metallic snap. Back in the Matthews house, Claire set her foot on the attic ladder. The wood was slick with unexpected moisture, like sap or old blood. Her fingers trembled. "Claire," her mother said again, firmer this time, "stop." But something, curiosity or the quiet, pulled whisper, drew Claire upward. Each rung groaned beneath her weight. She emerged into a darkness thicker than the night outside. The beam of her flashlight cut through floating motes of dust. Shapes of old trunks and forgotten furniture hunched in the corners like sleeping beasts. Then she saw it. A circle of chalk drawn on the attic floor, its lines faded but unmistakable. At the center rested a bundle of dried elm branches bound with black ribbon. Claire knelt. The branches smelled faintly of earth and iron. Her mother climbed up behind her and gasped. I remember this," she whispered. "When I was a girl, I watched my grandmother draw that circle. She said it kept the elm's anger at bay." A low creak came from the rafters. Both of them looked up. A figure crouched along the beam, its limbs long and jointed wrong. Red eyes gleamed like coals. It smiled, and the attic grew several degrees colder. Across town, the library doors groaned. The janitor, his body slack with unnatural sleep, was dragged backward by invisible hands. His feet left two parallel trails through the layer of dust. The floating book reopened, its pages riffling. Lines of crimson ink formed new words. Holloway's debt approaches its hour. The letters pulsed like a heartbeat. Claire gripped her mother's sleeve. "Why is it saying that name? What debt?" The figure on the beam tilted its head, and its voice scraped like bark against bark. "The Holloways promised us rest. They cut down the eldest elm. They stole our dream. The debt is never forgiven." The chalk circle trembled. Dust rose in a slow spiral. Her mother's eyes widened with a sudden memory of an old family tale, how her grandmother's grandmother had led a group of settlers to fell a massive, ancient elm to build their first church. The tree was said to be the town protector and its warden. They called it the Dreaming Elm, her mother whispered. The figure's ember eyes burned hotter. Dreaming still, dreaming in anger. The black ribbon around the branches unraveled by itself, and the twigs writhed like living snakes. Claire took a step back. The whisper became a chant that filled the attic, vibrating the floorboards. "No one sleeps. No one sleeps. No one sleeps." The branches lifted into the air, forming the shape of a gnarled crown. The ladder behind them slammed upward with a deafening crack, cutting off the exit. Claire's mother clutched her. "We're not alone anymore," she said, her voice barely a breath. And the figure, its red eyes like twin wounds in the dark, leaned closer and hissed. "The night of no sleep is only the beginning." The attic walls quivered as though some giant heartbeat pulsed behind the wooden planks. The crown of twigs hung in the air, spinning slowly, casting crooked shadows that crawled across the rafters like living things. Claire clung to her mother's arm. "We have to get out," she whispered. Her mother's eyes were fixed on the floating branches. "Not until I know what it wants. Our family did this. I have to listen." The shadowed figure tilted its head, the ember glow of its eyes flaring. To listen is to awaken. A rush of icy wind spiraled around them. Dust danced in frantic circles. The chalk lines of protective circle began to smudge, as though an invisible hand were rubbing them away. Her mother stepped inside the circle and raised her voice over the wind. "What is the debt? What do you want from us?" The figure descended from the beam like a spider dropping from a thread, its long limbs bending at impossible angles. It hovered just outside the chalk boundary. The hollow waves promised a dreaming elm eternal rest. It rasped. They burned the roots and sang the sleep song. But when the tree's heart ceased, the dreams escaped. We are those dreams. We will not be caged. Claire felt the floor vibrate beneath her feet, a low tremor like a distant train. Her mother steadied herself. "Then take me, if that's what you want. Leave my daughter." The figure's ember eyes narrowed. One soul cannot repay a town-stolen sleep. The crown of branches stopped spinning. Slowly it lowered until it hovered at eye level. The black ribbon writhed, then wrapped itself around the twigs once more, binding them tight. The bargain must be remade, the figure said, or no dawn will come. A sudden sharp crack split the air. One of the attic beams splintered, showering them with fragments of ancient wood. The ladder below groaned, then unfolded again with a dry creak. The figure recoiled from the chalk circle, as if pushed by an unseen force. Its eyes flared once, twice, then dimmed. "Find the root," it whispered, before the final toll. And in a burst of cold air, it vanished. For a heartbeat, the attic was silent, except for their ragged breathing. Claire's mother gripped her shoulders. "The root," she said. "The old elm. Maybe something still remains." Claire's voice trembled. "But where?" Her mother's gaze drifted to the far corner of the attic, where an ancient cedar chest sat half buried in dust. Perhaps she left a clue. They crossed the chest. Its brass lock was rusted but unlatched. Inside lay yellowed letters, brittle photographs, and a leather-bound journal whose cover bore the name Eleanor Holloway, 1897. Her mother opened the book with trembling hands. The first page carried a sketch of the great elm, its roots spiraling deep into dark soil. Beneath the drawing, in faded ink, Eleanor had written, "When the dreaming elm falls, the root must sleep in fire or the town will never wake." Claire swallowed hard. Fire. Her mother turned the page. A map of Elm Street, older, unpaved, dotted with only a few early houses. A black X marked a place near the center where the old church now stood. "The church," her mother whispered. "They built it over the stump." Across town, Nora fled down her staircase, clutching Baxter. The music box's words, "Stay awake," echoed in her mind. When she reached the front door, she found it wide open, though she was sure she had locked it. Outside, the street was empty and smothered in darkness. A single sound reached her, the triple toll of the town clock. Dong, dong, dong. Each strike fell heavier, slower, like the beat of some vast heart. The houses across the street flickered with brief, greenish light, as if the elms themselves exhaled. Baxter whimpered, his small body trembling. Nora tightened her hold on the dog. "I'm not sleeping," she whispered, and stepped onto the porch. At the library, the janitor jerked awake on the cold marble floor. The crimson letters that had bound his arms were gone, but the floating book hovered above him like a patient sentinel. It opened again to a single line, the ink fresh and wet, bringing the Holloway blood to the root. The letters bled downward, pulling into shape of an arrow that pointed toward the church at the end of Elm Street. The janitor's breath caught. The old church. As he rose unsteadily, the library doors unlocked with a loud click. Claire and her mother climbed down from the attic, journal in hand. The hallway below was eerily quiet, but a strange, faint glow seeped through the downstairs windows, a pale green luminescence that pulsed like breathing. Her mother flipped another page of the journal. A final note read, "When the toll strikes thrice, the elm shall wake. Only the Holloway flame can quiet the root." Claire's stomach nodded. 3 tolls. Her mother nodded grimly. "We've heard them twice tonight already." As if an answer, the town clock began its slow, ominous chime. Dong. The house trembled. Dong. Dust rained from the ceiling. Her mother grabbed Claire's hand. "We have to reach the church before the 3rd. They rushed for the door as the final chime rolled like distant thunder. Dong. The windows blazed green. The elm trees along the street groaned and twisted, their branches clawing toward the sky. Claire looked back just once and saw, silhouetted in the attic window, the red-eyed figure watching them. It raised one long finger to its lips, and the whisper carried across the entire street. No one sleeps until the debt is paid. The night had fallen thick and heavy over Elm Street, a kind of darkness that didn't just hide the stars but seemed to swallow their light whole. The crooked branches of the ancient elm trees swayed in a restless breeze, their dry twigs scraping together with a whispering hiss. The sound came and went in broken patterns, like words spoken too quietly to catch, like secrets meant for someone else. Sarah tightened her jacket around her shoulders. The air had turned sharper than she remembered. It tasted faintly of metal, like the tang of a rusted nail held too long between the teeth. Her flashlight, which had been temperamental all evening, flickered again, a brief spasm of weak light across the cracked sidewalk, and then died with faint, almost mocking click. She slapped the casing with her palm. The bulb gave a feeble glow, sputtered, and went dark again. The sudden blackness felt alive. It pressed against her eyes and seemed to hum against her skin. For a moment she heard nothing except the uneven rhythm of her own breathing and the quick thud of her heart. Then, from somewhere farther down the street, a long, low groan rose and faded, a sound like the slow complaint of a rusted hinge. Sarah froze. It came again, a little louder. Her eyes darted toward the end of the street. There, behind a tangle of shadow and overgrown hedges, stood the old Victorian house everyone in town avoided. It was a black shape against the paler sky, a silhouette of broken gables and peeling paint. She had walked past it half an hour earlier and had seen the heavy front door firmly shut. Now it hung slightly ajar. There was hardly any wind. Certainly not enough to move that swollen, weather-warped door. Her mouth went dry. The sensible thing was to turn around and leave, to keep walking until the house was nothing but a story told to someone else. But some force, curiosity, dread, something nameless, tugged at her like a slow undertow. She stepped forward. The cracked pavement amplified each footfall until the entire street seemed to echo with her movement. Even the whisper of the elm branches paused, as though the night itself was listening. When she reached the porch, she hesitated. The steps were slick with damp leaves, and the scent of old wood and rain-soaked dust filled her nose. The door creaked slightly in its frame, as if it had been waiting. Then something rolled across the porch floorboards with a hollow, muffled bounce. Sarah jerked back. A scuffed white rubber ball, smeared with grime and a faint rust-colored stain, came wobbling toward her. It wavered in its path, then tapped softly against the toe of her sneaker and settled there. She stared at it. Across its surface, carved rather than painted, were 5 jagged letters. Leave. The grooves were deep, the edges sharp, as though made by something far stronger than a child's toy knife. Her breath hitched. She crouched, reaching with an unsteady hand. Her fingers trembled so violently that when she tried to lift the ball, it slipped and rolled in a slow, lazy circle before stopping again. This time perfectly still, as though it had chosen its place. A sound followed. Not quite a growl, not quite a scream, something in between. It began as a low vibration, so deep she felt it in her ribs. Then it rose, stretching into a high, tearing wail that split the quiet like a pane of glass shattering. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was something caught between the two, something too ancient and too wrong to name. Sarah's body locked. The flashlight flickered to life without her touching it. The beam knifed through the dark, landing on the grand staircase inside the house. And there, at the top of the stairs, stood a figure. It was tall, too tall. Its limbs seemed unnaturally elongated, as though its shadow had learned how to escape the limits of bone. The head tilted to one side with an impossible, jointless bend, like the stem of a dying flower. 2 points of crimson light burned where eyes should have been. Before Sarah could scream, the flashlight snapped off. Darkness rushed back, heavier than before. Her heart thundered against her ribs. She could hear it, quick and panicked, like the frantic wings of a trapped bird. Then, creak. The first step of the staircase groaned. Creak. The second. Creak. The third. The sound was deliberate, patient, like a metronome marking time before something inevitable. Sarah tried to back away. Her knees refused to bend. Another step, another long, Aching creak. The air around her had grown colder, almost painfully so. Each breath left her lips in a faint cloud. Her flashlight, slick with condensation, slipped slightly in her grip. She tightened her hold, but her palms were clammy and her fingers stiff. Something scraped against the banister, a long, slow drag, like metal nails tracing the grain of the wood. Sarah found her voice at last, though it was no more than a whisper. "Who's there?" No answer. Only another creak, closer now. Her survival instincts finally broke the paralysis. She stumbled backward, her heel catching on the warped porch plank. She half turned toward the street, and a whisper brushed her ear. "You shouldn't be here." It was a breath more than a voice, soft and icy, as if spoken directly against her skin. Sarah spun, flashlight raised. No one. The porch behind her was empty. Her heart hammered so hard her vision blurred. The whisper came again, nearer this time. "Go before it sees you." She stepped down from the porch, her sneakers skidding on the damp wood. Splinters bit into her palms as she caught herself. Behind her the house was silent. The door no longer hung open. It was shut tight, as though it had never moved at all. The ball lay at the bottom of the steps. It rocked once, twice, and then rolled back toward the door, vanishing into the shadows as if pulled by invisible hands. Sarah stumbled backward onto the cracked sidewalk. Her pulse roared in her ears. She turned to run and froze. Halfway down the street, beneath the leaning canopy of elm branches, a faint glow pulsed. It was neither the warm yellow of a streetlight nor the cool blue of moonlight. It shimmered a deep, unsettling red. Slowly, the glow began to move. It glided across the cracked pavement, pausing every few yards. Sarah squinted, her breath catching. The light was not a reflection or a trick of the eye. It was a lantern, an old, rusted lantern swinging from a thin, bony hand. Its bearer was cloaked in shadow. The lantern's red glow caught only fragments. The curve of a shoulder, the suggestion of long fingers wrapped around the handle. No face, no eyes, only darkness where a face should be. Sarah's thoughts scrambled. Another neighbor, a prank, a lost wanderer. But the figure's movement was too smooth, too silent. Not a single footstep disturbed the litter of dry leaves. She backed away slowly, careful not to break the silence. The figure stopped. The lantern tilted, and the red glow spilled across the street, across Sarah. Her skin prickled. The air thickened until every breath felt like swallowing ice. Then the figure lifted its free hand and pointed straight at her. The whisper came again, but this time it was everywhere, inside her ears, inside her skull. "You were warned." The lantern's light flared bright and sudden, as if someone had flung open the door to a furnace. For an instant the whole street was bathed in blood-red brilliance. Sarah raised an arm to shield her eyes. When she lowered it, the figure had vanished. Only the faint scent of scorched metal remained, hanging in the air like the aftermath of lightning. Her knees weakened. She wanted to run, but her legs felt like lead. From the darkness of the Victorian house came a final sound, soft, deliberate, like fingernails tapping on glass. Tap, tap, tap. 3 slow knocks. Then silence. Sarah turned and fled, sprinting blindly down Elm Street. Branches clawed at her hair and jacket, but she barely felt them. Her heartbeat thundered so loudly that it drowned the world. Behind her, somewhere deep in the night, a low chuckle rose, faint at first and sharper until it sliced the wind like a blade. It followed her all the way home. The cold followed Sarah all the way back to her house. It wasn't just a bite of late autumn air. This chill seemed heavier, a quiet, invisible weight that settled in her chest and refused to leave. She had run nearly the entire length of Elm Street without once looking back, but the memory of that red lantern and the whisper that had brushed her ear clung to her like a second skin. Her porch light burned a faint yellow when she reached home. For the first time she noticed how thin the light looked against the dark, like a single match trying to fight an ocean of night. She unlocked the door with trembling fingers and stepped inside. The familiar smell of old pine floorboards greeted her, but instead of comfort it carried an edge of damp earth, as though the woods themselves had followed her indoors. Sarah closed the door, threw the deadbolt, and leaned against the wood, eyes shut. She waited for her breathing to slow, but it didn't. Her heart still hammered against her ribs, each beat echoing the slow creaks of the Victorian staircase she had fled. Only when she forced herself to open her eyes did she notice the draft. A thin current of cold air brushed across her ankles. Her bedroom door stood half open at the end of the hall. She remembered closing it, not just closing it, locking it, before she left for her evening walk. A tiny sound escaped her throat, half gasp, half whimper. She swallowed it quickly, as if someone might hear. The house was silent, but silence no longer meant empty. It felt like a pause before something spoke. Sarah edged forward. Each step of the hallway floor gave a soft groan beneath her weight, and each groan sounded too loud, like the house was warning some of her approach. When she reached the bedroom, she paused again. The door moved slightly, just enough to creak. She pushed it open. Moonlight spilled through the window, silver and thin. The curtains swayed as if stirred by a breeze. The lock on the window latch hung loose. Sarah's breath caught. She never left the window unlocked. The night outside was black as pitch, the street below empty. A few leaves skittered across the sidewalk like quick, fleeing insects. She shut the window firmly, turned the latch until it clicked, and checked it twice. Only then did she see the newspaper. It lay in the middle of her bed, yellowed, edges curled, the paper brittle with age. She hadn't brought any newspaper upstairs. She hadn't even bought a paper in weeks. The headline, printed in thick black letters faded to gray, read, Elm Street Tragedy, 1957. Family vanishes without a trace. Her pulse quickened. She lowered herself to the edge of the bed and unfolded the fragile sheet. The article described the sudden disappearance of the Whitmore family. Parents and 2 children gone overnight. No sign of struggle. Neighbors reported strange lights in the old Victorian house before the family disappeared. Only one survivor remained. A 6-year-old boy, Thomas Whitmore, who had been found wandering the street at dawn, barefoot and mute. Sarah traced the boy's small photograph with her fingertip. The image was grainy, but his wide eyes seemed to stare directly into hers, blank, almost knowing. At the bottom of the page, someone had scrawled in red ink, jagged and uneven, "It waits." The ink looked fresh. Sarah let the paper fall to the floor. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thicker. She turned toward the door and heard it, a whisper, soft, so soft she almost mistook it for the rustle of curtains. Sarah, her name. The sound came from behind her, from the locked window. She spun, hard in her throat. The window pane reflected the moonlight and her own pale face. Nothing else. Who's there? Her voice cracked. No answer. Only the faint tap of a branch against the glass. She stepped closer until her breath fogged the window. The glass chilled her skin through the thin fabric of her sleeve. Outside, the elm trees stood still. No wind moved their branches. The branch tapping against the glass wasn't moving. The tap came again. Once, twice, thrice. Sarah backed away. The whisper followed. "Knows where you are." Her stomach tightened. She turned and fled into the hallway, the old newspaper forgotten on the bed. Downstairs, the house seemed to hold its breath. Every familiar object, the bookshelf, the worn sofa, the family photos, looked slightly wrong, as if shifted a fraction of an inch while she was gone. The clock on the mantel read 12:03. Its pendulum swayed with an exaggerated slowness, each tick stretching too long. She grabbed her phone from the counter. The screen remained black, no matter how many times she pressed a button. The charger light glowed red, but the phone would not turn on. A sharp, metallic scent prickled her nose. Rust or blood. Sarah spun toward the kitchen. The smell grew stronger. The faucet dripped, each drop hitting the steel sink with a sound too loud for so small motion. Drip, drip, drip. When she reached the tap, a single bead of water slid down the spout and turned dark halfway down. By the time it struck the sink, it was the color of dried wine. She stumbled back, knocking into the counter. A plate clattered to the floor and shattered. Instantly, the dripping stopped. Silence. Then the whisper returned, closer now, almost brushing her ear. "Don't run." Sarah clapped her hands to her ears, but the words seeped through her palms. Not sound but thought. Her eyes darted to the living room window. Outside, the streetlight flickered. A shape passed beneath it. Too tall, moving too smoothly. The lantern. Red light pulsed faintly within the fog of night. The figure paused at the end of her driveway. Even through the glass, Sarah felt its gaze, an invisible weight pressing against her chest. Her breath came in ragged bursts. The lantern tilted slightly, spilling its crimson glow across her lawn. She backed away, step by step, until her shoulder met the cold wall. The figure raised its free hand and pointed at the house. Her house. The porch light outside blinked once and went out. Darkness devoured the yard. Sarah's throat tightened around a scream. She turned and bolted for the back door, heart pounding. The handle turned in her grip, locked. She fumbled with the bolt. It wouldn't move. The metal felt slick, as if coated with oil. Behind her, the front door rattled. Once, twice, then a slow, deliberate knock. 3 measured beats. Sarah pressed her back against the kitchen door, eyes fixed on the hallway. The knock came again, louder. Her own heartbeat filled her ears until it became a dull roar. The whisper returned, a breath inside her head. "It knows where you are." The lights flickered. One by one, the bulbs in the hallway burst with tiny pops, scattering glass across the floor. The final bulb above her sputtered and died. Darkness. Something moved in the living room, a slow scrape, like fingernails across wood. Sarah's chest seized. She clutched the counter's edge until her knuckles whitened. The scrape came closer. Then the whisper, a single word, low and cold. "Welcome." The red glow of the lantern flared suddenly through the front window, bathing the room in a sickly crimson. Shadows stretched long across the walls, twisting into shapes that had no name. Sarah shut her eyes, praying it would vanish. But the whisper was inside her now, inside her skull, inside her breath. And it was laughing. Morning arrived, but daylight brought no comfort. Sarah awoke with a faint metallic taste of fear still sharp on her tongue. Her alarm clock had failed to ring. The hands were frozen at 3:07 a.m. The exact moment she remembered the lantern's glow spilling through her window. For a long time she lay still, staring at the ceiling. She half expected to hear the whisper again, that cold breath curling against her ear. Instead, the house was silent. Not peaceful, just watchful. When she finally pushed herself from bed, her legs trembled as if she had been running all night. The old newspaper lay crumpled on the floor where she had dropped it. The headline, faded but undeniable, glared back. Elm Street tragedy, 1957. Family vanishes without a trace. The red scrawl at the bottom. "It waits," looked even fresher than before, as though someone had traced the letters again while she slept. Sarah scooped up the paper and shoved it into her bag. She needed answers. By mid-morning, the town's public library stood before her, a squat brick building with tall windows fogged by the crisp autumn air. Inside, the smell of old paper and lemon polish wrapped around her like an embrace she couldn't trust. The head librarian, Mrs. Whitby, peered over her glasses as Sarah approached the reference desk. "Local archives?" Sarah asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Mrs. Whitby raised an eyebrow but pointed her toward the basement stairs. "Down there, last 2 cabinets on the left." The basement was cooler than the day above. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a pale flicker over rows of dusty filing cabinets. Sarah found the labeled drawers and began to search. Newspaper clippings, photographs, brittle pieces of yellowed correspondence. She sifted through them with trembling fingers until one headline made her pause. "Local boy found after Elm Street disappearance, 1957. Her pulse quickened. The article described Thomas Whitmore, age 6, discovered barefoot and silent in the middle of Elm Street at dawn. He never spoke of what he saw. Doctors wrote of episodes of screaming and visions of a shadow with red eyes. Sarah's breath caught as she turned the page. A black and white photograph of young Thomas stared back. His eyes, dark and round, seemed older than any child's. Beneath the image, A single handwritten note. Ink faded to a watery gray. He said it followed him home. Sarah's skin prickled. She slid the note back and reached for the next folder. More reports followed. Unexplained lights near the old Victorian house. Neighbors complaining of whispers at night. Pets vanishing without trace. A second headline, dated 10 years later. Caretaker found dead inside Elm House. Cause unknown. The caretaker's body, the article said, bore no wounds. The coroner listed the cause of death as sudden cardiac arrest, though neighbors claimed the man had been found with his eyes wide open, pupils stained a deep crimson. Sarah's hand shook so violently she almost dropped the file. Behind her, something shifted, a soft scrape, like paper sliding across metal. She turned. The basement was empty. The fluorescent lights flickered, buzzing like angry insects. Another scrape, this time closer. Sarah swallowed and backed toward the stairs. A breath, cold and dry, brushed the back of her neck. She spun. No one. The light snapped off. Total darkness. Her pulse roared in her ears. She fumbled for her phone. Still dead. The screen a black mirror. From afar into the room came a sound she knew too well. The slow, deliberate tap, tap, tap of fingernails across wood. Her chest tightened. Then a whisper, low and curling through the dark. Sarah. She bolted up the stairs, taking them two at a time. Her shoulders slammed the heavy door at the top. It swung open with a squeal. Daylight spilled across her face, like a flood of relief. Mrs. Whitby looked up from the desk. "Find what you needed?" she asked. Sarah tried to steady her breath. "Ah, yes." "Thank you." The librarian's gaze lingered on her a moment longer than necessary. Something unreadable passed behind her eyes. Then she nodded and returned to her book. Outside, the sky had dimmed with thick gray clouds, though it was barely noon. Sarah clutched her bag and walked quickly, the newspaper rustling like dry leaves inside. She had taken only a few steps toward home when an elderly voice called her name. "Sarah?" She turned. An older woman, in a heavy shawl, stood near the corner store. Her face was lined, but her dark eyes were sharp. "I'm Mrs. Caldwell," the woman said, her voice soft but urgent. "You were near the old house last night." Sarah stiffened. "How do you—" "It leaves a scent," Mrs. Caldwell interrupted, stepping closer. "Once it chooses someone, the air around them changes. People like me can feel it." Sarah gripped the strap of her bag. "What is it?" Mrs. Caldwell's eyes darkened. "The shadow. It feeds on those who listen. That house is not a house. It's a doorway. Once it sees you, it follows. You mustn't answer when it calls your name." "I didn't," Sarah began. "Not yet," the old woman said. "But it will call again. And when you answer, it will cross." A gust of wind cut between them, rattling the elm branches overhead. When Sarah looked back, Mrs. Caldwell had already turned away, vanishing down the narrow lane like smoke. The rest of the walk home passed in a haze. Her mind replayed the woman's words until they became a rhythm with her footsteps. "It will call again. When you answer, it will cross." By the time she reached her house, the sky was the color of old iron. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of rust. Her stomach dropped. She had cleaned the kitchen that morning. There should be no such smell. On the living room floor lay the rubber ball. She hadn't brought it inside. She had left it on the porch last night. Across its scuffed surface a new word was carved, deeper, sharper than before. "Stay." Her breath caught. She backed toward the hallway, never taking her eyes off the ball. From upstairs came a soft creak, like a single footstep. Sarah's heart pounded. She looked toward the staircase. The shadows along the banister seemed darker, thicker, almost liquid. The whisper followed, slow and cold. "It knows where you are." The rubber ball rolled, without a push, without a breath of wind, until it stopped at the foot of the stairs. Another creak, and another. The house seemed to lean closer, listening. Sarah tightened her grip on the strap of her bag, every muscle locked between flight and paralysis. The whisper came again, lower this time, almost gentle. "Stay." Sarah froze at the bottom of the stairs. The rubber ball rested like a tiny red plant at her feet. Its single word, "Stay," cut deep enough that the letters seemed to bleed shadow. Another creak from above, then silence. Her breath rasped in the hush. Every instinct screamed at her to leave, yet her legs refused to move. The hallway smelled of damp earth and something faintly metallic, like iron left out in the rain. She forced herself backward, inch by inch, until her shoulder brushed the wall. The ball rolled again, slowly, deliberately, until it nudged the first step of the staircase. Tap. Sarah bit her lip to stop the scream rising in her throat. Tap. The ball climbed a step. Impossible. Tap. Another step. Her pulse thundered. Each tiny bounce sounded like a hammer on wood. The ball reached the third step, then settled, rocking gently as if an unseen hand still steadied it. From above came a whisper, soft, almost affectionate. Sarah? Her name stretched like a sigh. Mrs. Caldwell's warning echoed in her mind. You mustn't answer when it calls your name. Sarah pressed a trembling fist against her mouth. She would not answer. Sarah, come. The whisper turned coaxing, like a lullaby a mother might sing. The ball rolled back down, step by step, without a sound this time, and settled once more at her feet. Come upstairs. The air grew heavier, pressing against her skin. Shadows thickened along the banister, sliding down the rail like dark water. Sarah backed toward the kitchen door, her gaze fixed on the staircase. The rubber ball quivered, then stilled. A sudden crash shattered the silence, her bedroom door slamming shut upstairs. The house vibrated with a force. The whisper sharpened, now a hiss. Now! The ball shot forward, striking her shoe. She flinched, the sharp impact jolting her legs into motion. She spun toward the back door. Locked, her fingers fumbled with the bolt. It refused to budge, as though welded in place. Behind her, the slow creak of a single descending footstep. Creak. She turned. A shape emerged at the top of the stairs, tall, thin, shrouded in a shifting darkness that swallowed the dim light. Its outline wavered, as if made of smoke. In its hand, the faint red glow of a lantern pulsed like a dying heart. Sarah's breath hitched. The lantern's light did not illuminate. It stained. The walls, the banister, even the air seemed to bleed crimson. The figure stepped down. Creak. The lantern swung gently. With each swing the shadows on the walls twisted, forming faces that stretched and grimaced in silent screams. Creak. Another step. You let me in. The voice seeped into her skull rather than her ears, each word scraping like metal against bone. Sarah's mind raced. Don't answer. Don't answer. She backed toward the living room window, desperate. Her eyes darted to the lock. It was stiff with rust, but she gripped it and yanked. The latch gave. She shoved the window upward. Cold night air rushed in like a gasp. Creak. Another step. She swung a leg over the sill and froze. The elm branches outside rattled not with wind, but with a slow, rhythmic shake, as though something unseen moved from branch to branch. You can't hide out there. The lantern's glow brightened, a deep arterial red. Sarah felt the color seep beneath her skin, her veins throbbing with its heat. Her grip on the windowsill faltered. She forced herself through the opening and dropped to the damp grass below. The shock of cold ground snapped her senses awake. She sprinted across the yard, heart pounding. Behind her, the house creaked, not with the settling of wood, but with the weight of something moving fast. She reached the street. The mist hung low, curling like smoke around the lamps. For a moment she thought she had escaped. Then the lantern's glow bloomed behind her, bright and sudden. She turned. The figure stood in the window she had just leapt through, lantern raised. But the glass reflected nothing. Not the lantern's light, not the shadow's shape. Only darkness stared back. The whisper followed, soft again, almost tender. You can run, but you brought it with you. Sarah stumbled backward. The street stretched empty, silent. The fog thickened until houses on either side blurred into gray shapes. A sound like dry leaves skittered behind her. She spun, but the street remained empty. Sarah? The voice came from everywhere now, from the fog, from the ground beneath her feet, from inside her own head. When you answer, it crosses. Mrs. Caldwell's warning flickered again in her memory. She clamped her lips shut, jaw aching. Something cold brushed her hand. She jerked back. A child stood before her. He was no taller than her waist, dressed in clothing decades out of fashion. Knickerbockers, a buttoned shirt, bare feet mottled blue with cold. His wide eyes were familiar, dark, ancient. Thomas Whitmore. Sarah's breath caught. You. The boy raised a finger to his lips. Sure. His voice was barely a breath. It listens. He glanced over his shoulder, fear flashing across his small face. It wants you to speak. That's how it comes through. Sarah knelt, her own fear tempered by the urgency in his gaze. How do I stop it? She whispered. The boy's eyes filled with something older than sorrow. You can't stop it. He pressed a small scrap of paper into her palm. But you can last a night. The paper felt warm, as though it had been resting against a heartbeat. Thomas looked past her again. His mouth opened as if to warn her of something more. Then he vanished. No sound, no trace. Only the damp fog swirled where it stood. Sarah unfolded the scrap of paper. 3 words, scrawled in the same jagged red ink as the newspaper. Don't answer back. A sudden gust tore the note from her fingers. It spiraled upward, lost in the mist. Behind her, the whisper deepened, no longer coaxing but commanding. Sarah. Her name rolled like thunder. The fog shivered. Look at me. The red lantern's glow reappeared, closer now, slicing through the mist. The shadowed figure advanced without footsteps, gliding across the pavement. The lantern's crimson light pulsed with a racing heartbeat. Say my name. The command vibrated inside her skull. The urge to respond, stronger than instinct, heavier than gravity, pulled at her tongue. Her jaw ached as she forced her lips closed. Just once. The figure stopped barely 10 feet away. Its shape quivered like heat rising off asphalt. The lantern lifted higher. For a split second, Sarah glimpsed what lay beneath the shifting dark. Not a face, but a void. A black hollow deeper than night, ringed by eyes, dozens of eyes, each red as dying coals, each fixed on her. The urge to speak became a physical pain. It burned her throat, a scream locked behind her teeth. Sarah. Her knees buckled. The whisper became a roar. Welcome me. Her lips trembled. A single sound escaped, half a breath of her own name. No. She choked, clamping her mouth shut. The figure hissed, a sound like steam escaping a broken pipe. The lantern's light flared so bright the world bled crimson. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the glow began to fade. The eyes blinked out one by one. Not tonight. The voice rasped, distant now, almost a growl. The fog thinned. The streetlights flickered back to life, their pale yellow glow almost gentle. The figure retreated, the lantern's light shrinking until it was no more than a dying ember. Sarah collapsed to her knees, every muscle trembling. Her breath came in ragged gasps. The next 24 hours crawled by like a slow bleed of time. Sarah barely slept. Every creak of her old house felt like a warning. Every gust of wind through the elm branches outside sounded like a whisper she almost recognized. When morning finally burned away the last of fog, she sat at the kitchen table clutching a cold cup of coffee and staring at the rubber ball. It rested on the sill where she'd found it, the fresh words, "See you soon," cut deep and dark. She had tried to throw it away at dawn, but each time she turned her back, the ball returned to the window, as though the house itself refused to let it leave. By late afternoon, the sky was the color of wet cement. Clouds rolled low and heavy, muffling the town in a strange half-light. Sarah's nerves twitched with each muted rumble of distant thunder. When dusk came, the light bled away too quickly, as if night had been waiting just out of sight, eager to swallow the day. She checked every lock, doors, windows, even the attic hatch, then sat on the sofa with the rubber ball in her lap. Mrs. Caldwell's words replayed like a scratched record. It will call again. When you answer, it will cross. Sarah kept her mouth shut. The first sound came a little after midnight. Not a knock, not the familiar creak of timber. A slow, rhythmic dragging across the porch. Scrape, pause, scrape. Her heart thudded. She stood, gripping the ball as if it could protect her. Through the thin curtain she saw nothing. only the faint silver of moonlight against a wet street. Scrape, scrape, then a single soft knock. 3 times. Sarah stepped back. "I'm not answering," she whispered, but the sound of her own voice frightened her. The rubber ball grew warm in her hands, almost pulsing like a heartbeat. The knock came again, louder now, and then the voice. "Sarah?" The whisper slithered through the cracks of the door. It was not loud. It didn't need to be. Her name stretched long and low, each syllable like the scrape of nails across bone. She pressed her palms over her ears. "No," she mouthed, refusing to give it sound. "Let me in." The porch light flickered once and died. Darkness pressed against the curtains. "Say it." Her jaw clenched so tightly it ached. "Don't answer back." The front door shivered under an unseen blow. Bang! And the hallway light burst, showering tiny shards of glass. In the sudden blackness, the whisper became a chorus, a dozen overlapping voices, men and women, children, and something deeper that had no human name. "Sarah, Sarah, Sarah." The rubber ball slipped from her hands and rolled toward the door, glowing faintly red from within. As it reached the threshold, it stopped and began to rise. Slowly, impossibly, the ball floated upward until it hovered at eye level. A thin crimson mist seeped from the carved letters and curled toward the ceiling. The door handle turned. Click! Sarah's breath hitched. The deadbolt remained locked, but the handle turned again, harder this time. Click! 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 The rubber ball pulsed with a dull crimson light and then exploded in a silent flash. No sound, only a sudden bloom of red that washed the room like blood. When the light faded, the front door stood open. The figure waited on the porch. Tall, shrouded in swirling black. The red lantern hung from one hand, its glow throbbing like a diseased heart. The other hand beckoned, long fingers of pure shadow curling toward her. "Welcome me." The voice was inside her skull now, bypassing ears, rattling against bone. Sarah stumbled back. "No," she whispered without thinking. The figure tilted its head. The lantern's light brightened until the wallpaper bled red. "You spoke." Her stomach dropped. The single word, "no," had betrayed her. "Now you're mine." The house shuddered. Every window blew inward at once with a sound like the rush of 1,000 wings. Curtains whipped and twisted. The air itself thickened into a cold, choking fog. The figure stepped across the threshold. The lantern's light dimmed, but its presence filled the room with a darkness so dense it swallowed sound. Shadows climbed the walls, their shapes shifting into silent screams. Sarah backed away until her shoulders struck the far wall. The darkness moved like a living tide, closing the distance between them. A sudden flash of pale light cut through the room. Thomas Whitmore stood beside her. The boy's eyes, ancient and sorrowful, met hers. "Run," he whispered. His voice was barely more than a breath, but steadied her like an anchor. "It can't cross the elm." "The elm," she gasped. "The tree at the end of the street. It fears the roots." The shadowed figure turned its countless eyes toward the boy. A hiss like steam filled the air. The lantern flared with furious red. "Go!" Thomas cried. "Now!" Sarah bolted. The darkness lashed after her, tendrils of smoke snapping at her heels. She leapt through the shattered doorway and into the night. Fog swallowed the street, thick and blinding. But at the far end she saw it. The great elm tree, old in the town itself, its gnarled trunk lit by a sliver of moonlight. Behind her the whisper became a roar. "Sarah!" She ran, breath burning in her chest. The pavement seemed to stretch, every step heavier than the last. The air around her thickened like wet wool. "Come back!" Red light flooded the fog. Closer, closer. The hiss of the lantern grew into a violent hum, a sound that vibrated through her bones. The elm tree loomed ahead, its roots knotted like ancient fists. Sarah threw herself against the trunk and clung to the rough bark. The red glow stopped. She turned. The figure stood at the edge of the tree's shadow, lantern raised. Its countless eyes blazed, but its feet would not cross the dark line where the elm's shadow touched the street. "Mine," it growled. Thomas appeared again beside the roots, his small hand slipping into hers. It can't touch what the elm protects, he said, voice steady now. But it never leaves. The shadow hissed, a sound of ancient fury. The lantern's glow flared once, twice, and then with a deafening crack, it shattered. Shards of red light rained through the fog and disappeared. The figure collapsed inward like smoke sucked into a vacuum. In seconds the street was empty. Only the mist remained. Sarah slumped against the tree, lungs heaving. Thomas stood a moment longer, eyes distant. "You lasted the night," he said softly. "Will it come back?" she whispered. The boy's gaze lifted to the empty street. "It waits. It always waits." Then he too began to fade, his outline dissolving into the pale morning mist. "Thank you," Sarah breathed. His voice, faint and almost lost in the breeze, answered. "Don't forget, never answer." And then he was gone. The first weak rays of dawn broke through the clouds, painting the elm's bark with a soft gold. Sarah stepped away from the tree. Her house stood silent in the distance, windows dark, the shattered door hanging open like a mouth that had lost its scream. On the porch, the rubber ball rested once more. Its surface was smooth, no carving, no red letters, only a single dark stain that refused to catch the light. Sarah turned from it and walked into the waking town, the elm shadow stretching long behind her. Epilogue. That autumn the old Victorian house on Elm Street was condemned and later burned in an unexplained fire. Neighbors swore they saw no flames, only a red glow in the fog that night. No one ever rebuilt on the lot. No one ever rebuilt on the lot. Children still dare each other to touch the elm at midnight, but few make it all the way. Those who do sometimes hear a soft, distant whisper, "Say my name." And if you listen closely, just beneath the whisper, you can hear a boy's voice, urgent, pleading. "Don't answer back." The end.